in today's episode.
I think one of the jokes of our early investors is that we caused COVID because Nate and I wanted to work together. It was kind of like drinking from a fire hose. And I got exposed to a lot of these. Really, we're very much focused on showing value with our customers. What Spec does is we're a customer journey security company. And what we do is we protect brands from the abuse and the attacks and the fraud that happens, the compliance things that happen in the consumer journey. Like, hey, what the heck happened? Blocking revenue is always a challenge, which leaves fraud fighters in, I think, a very, very difficult spot. It was the Nigerian scam. I tell my family and my friends who aren't as savvy about fraud is just to, slow things down. Fraud, I think, is a very esoteric thing, even within an organization. Fraud is a bit of a sales role.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today for a new episode of the podcast A Journey into Fraud Prevention. I'm your host Ivan Prokofiev. New episode and new exciting guest. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate the episode on any platforms such as Apple, Spotify or YouTube. And share the podcast in your network. It means a lot to me and allow me to invite more and more new guests. And most important, enjoy. Let's begin. Поехали. Hi Patrick, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Ivan, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for joining me today. First of all, my congratulations, Spec secured 15 million in Series A. It is incredible milestone. I hope you're happy, or maybe not, maybe focusing already on the next round.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's definitely exciting times. I think it's a testament to the feedback we've been getting from the market, and then from our investors as well. So super excited about that, and equally as excited to be on. So thank you for having me on, and I'm super excited to answer your questions and share with you some of my experiences in the industry.
Would love to hear about that one. And for beginning, if you don't mind, could you share a bit about yourself for everyone who just listening and don't know you? Just quick intro. Let's call it like that.
Sure. I've been in the fraud space since 2014, and I've been in the payment space since 2011, and maybe even a little earlier. In college, I worked for a payments company as well. So not always dedicated in fraud in the early days, but definitely worked at companies where fraud was a vector. I've been on both the the merchant side as well as on the solutions provider side. So have kind of the perspective from both sides as to kind of what solutions providers can bring, but as well as the challenges that merchants and marketplaces and fintechs and financial services companies face when trying to create a good customer experience and stop bad actors on their platform.
Amazing. A really amazing introduction. We already have some things that we're going to discuss later on. Usually I start all my episodes from simple questions. Fraud prevention. What is fraud prevention for you?
Oh, I think it's both very simple, but also very broad. I think the most simple form is just like misrepresenting yourself for financial gain. So, that could be using stolen credit cards. It could be, kind of misrepresenting who you are to get a PPP loan, to buy a Lamborghini, right? But there's also things I think that blur the line where I kind of call them abuse and not outright fraud, because there's not necessarily like a criminal aspect to it in that like folks aren't going to jail for it. Like, toll fraud, going through a sign up form at a marketplace or any kind of payments company that does payouts and redirecting a verification to a 1-900 number, right? That's, I think falls under fraud, but I don't think anyone's going to jail for it, right? And then there could be even cases like utilizing all your family members' information to register for Taylor Swift's Eras Tour, right? That's not necessarily, even for financial gain, you're just trying to increase your chances of securing hard to get tickets, right? But all of those, I think we can agree, fall under the realm of fraud prevention teams for these types of providers, right? For like a Ticketmaster or, even for a payment facilitator, right? That is kind of like feeling the brunt of that kind of attack or abuse, I would say kind of falls under fraud prevention. So not sure if that's the most popular opinion, but it's both very kind of narrowly defined and kind of easy things like chargebacks and the like, where if you have the ability to, you would turn that over to law enforcement and have the person prosecuted and arrested to, sneaker botting and all of these other things that, merchants want to get out of their ecosystem and kind of like give a better experience to their customers, where some bad actors are kind of skirting the line between what's allowed on the platform and not necessarily illegal.
I really like it how you split it. This, in my opinion, on three different groups. What you mentioned, one of them is like something really criminal things related to fraud prevention, stolen identities, or maybe someone buying guns, etc., etc. Another group, it is like abusing part. It happens everywhere. Everyone want to buy something with discount and looking for coupons and coupon abuse. No one forgot about this one. And if you have like your example with Taylor Swift concert, if you want to increase your chances, you just create 1,000 of Gmail's account or ask everyone who you know to sign in to increase your chances. And the last one, it's more like financial part of the industry when you, try to preventing if you're fraud fighter, but from guys from another side, they try to just like abusing cards, etc., etc. It kind of in broad with the first one, but I believe these guys rarely going to the jail, as you mentioned. They definitely, some of them might, catch by FBI or any other organization, but compared to the first one, whereas a lot of the government try to focus into catch them, it's something different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as the industry has progressed, right, we saw a lot of like offshoring of fraud, right, to get out of like jurisdictions where, they like our law enforcement could prosecute. And then I think post pandemic, it seems like there's just been a rise where it's just like folks in the US, again, like, it's not outright illegal to buy 200 pairs of Nikes or something, right, when there's a drop. But certainly, I think, as consumers or even Nike likely doesn't want that to happen, right? So there are things that are, I feel like falls under the fraud prevention teams, right? To kind of protect that customer experience that to me aren't, outright like financial fraud, right? It's just like they did pay for those shoes, and,
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
they were able to buy tickets, right? They just kind of went through and kind of blurred the line between what is acceptable or not.
And you mentioned you in the fraud industry since 2014. It's next year is going to be anniversary for you, 10 years in the industry. And what do you think about the industry in general? Is it changed so far? Do you see the vector where it's going?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone in listening to your podcast, I think a lot of folks have answered the same way. Is it's dynamic. It's always changing, right? It's an industry where like no day is like the previous one, and abuse, fraud, compliance issues change all the time, and I think there's almost a feeling like what's changed that we don't know about yet, right? Like what vectors are being tested or are starting to be successful that people don't really know. And then with generative AI and, kind of like utilizing, AI to train on these feedback loops, like I think fraud is exploding, right? And abuse, right? Not, again, not just quote unquote financial fraud, but this abuse and things that are happening on the platform. And it could be like peer-to-peer messaging, right? Like getting somebody off the platform to sell something or, redirecting them into their own private links or things like that. Like that isn't necessarily even a financial loss to the consumer on a platform, but it is certainly abuse that platforms want to get rid of. So to me, the industry is really interesting because no day is the same. And we're always learning. Even the 1-900 fraud, like until that happened at a place I was working, I didn't even know that existed. So I think that's part of the exciting thing. It's what keeps things interesting. It's where I think folks in the industry that are successful continue to be successful because they're so curious and interested in these new trends. And I think certainly it creates challenges as well.
I briefly checked your LinkedIn profile, and I saw you join eBay in 2019, like COVID time. How it was? Because I just remember I worked in booking, and then for travel industry, it's like not a great time. But for eBay, I expecting everything going up, all metrics going screw up, everything going as no one expected.
So I actually joined eBay before the COVID time, and eBay was doing a big change and moving off of PayPal and onto Adyen. So that was the big thing. It was like boom times, right? Like trying this big, kind of like global change. It was really exciting to be a part of, and certainly really exciting. And then missed a bit of that kind of COVID time at eBay. We actually, my co-founder Nate and I started Spec right before the shutdown in the Bay Area, like during COVID. So I think the feeling that we have is we actually started Spec during COVID, and I think one of the jokes of our early investors is that we caused COVID because Nate and I wanted to work together again, and we decided to spin up this side project that became Spec that really launched after the pandemic really impacted the world.
Okay, we finally know the second reason of the COVID. Okay, we're gonna record this one, right? And back 2014, when you decide to join fraud prevention, what was your motivation? What's the story behind it, and why and what still motivate you to stay in this area for this long period of time, almost 10 years?
So I joined Threat Metrics, and that's how I think officially got into fraud prevention. As I mentioned, I was part of payments companies where like there is no payment company without some sort of fraud or compliance aspect, right? So it's like they go hand in hand, right? But officially part of like I joined Threat Metrics because they're doing something really cool, right? And I didn't fully understand it because I didn't have the kind of the background in fraud to really understand why it was like, cool and kind of how the industry has progressed. But I joined because it was a up and coming company. It was just a really interesting company to join. And it was there where like I started to learn more about, kind of how fraud from credit card and maybe like digital payments kind of evolved into like more of a digital identity aspect, right? Trying to catch abuse at login and account creation and not just when somebody was trying to pay, right? So we were, I think, kind of on the forefront of the move to these broad spectrum, providers that can look across the entire customer journey, via API, and that was really exciting. So that's how I got into it, and we worked with a number of large brands, and kind of marketplaces, digital goods, fintech, finserv, e-commerce merchants as well, and it just became just a fun puzzle, right? It's just like every day working with merchants and trying to understand like, what like, a Facebook or maybe even a Bumble might face, right? That are like totally different, right? And there's really unique problems that each of these merchants face. And it just became this really cool puzzle, right? Of like trying to solve a compliance problem and then moving on into a, kind of marketplace collusion type of thing to, just straight up like, automated, card testing to a compliance related thing. So it just was kind of like drinking from a fire hose. And I got exposed to a lot of these really, really kind of like new types of attacks, like with our customers, and worked hand in hand with them to try to solve it.
Yeah, threat metrics, they're huge. I believe they right now one of the biggest, I assume, companies because they're one of the longest on the market. And I go ask first that's questions, and after this we jump for another one. So you already have an idea in mind that in 5 years your company going to be bigger than threat metrics. Is it one of your target?
I mean, there's always a hope, right? But I think at the end of the day, it's if we show value to our customers, to the merchants, to the, the industry, good things will happen, right? So like we're very much focused on showing value with our customers to the market and sharing the, kind of the interesting and novel ways that we're able to help our customers. And I think if we do so and we're successful, like things will happen, right? But we didn't start this to think that it would fail. I think there's a belief internally, and being on the merchant side, we definitely have a belief that this is a problem that's worth solving for, and then the rest is kind of up to the market adoption and the execution and our success at getting the industry to understand what we're trying to do.
Actually, I believe I'm going to jump straight away to the questions about the spec. Could you share a bit more, like what is spec? Maybe you have some specific story about why you call it spec and why you so passionate about this project.
Yeah. So, I mean, what we're passionate about is, what, you and your listeners experience, which is like, not only is fraud ever changing, but it's also an asymmetrical battle, right? So the attackers often can move way faster than organizations that, you're doing work for, that your listeners are doing work for. So what Spec does is we're a customer journey security company. And what we do is we protect brands from the abuse and the attacks and the fraud that happens, the compliance things that happen in the consumer journey. So we're able to look at every single interaction between the consumer and the website without an API. And that's really where the name Spec came from, right? So it's like specify the data that we want to have access to, not limited to, an API call that an engineer has to build, maintain, and update on a regular basis, but just from the network traffic, specify what, like all of the data, right? What data you need. And from there, we're able to identify anomalies and attacks. We're able to orchestrate out to any of the third-party APIs that, a business may want. And then finally, we're able to mask how the business responds to the fraud attack. And this is how we're able to get around kind of the AI-based solutions out there that are really using the feedback loops that your platforms are basically leaking data to those attackers by basically kind of putting up a CAPTCHA. So they'll be able to reverse engineer like how many, the thresholds to generate that CAPTCHA. They have tools to beat the CAPTCHA or to farm that out to folks. But all of those, countermeasures that businesses utilize are leveraged by attack tools to get around it. So Spec's unique value proposition is we protect the customer journey by actually masking that response. So the attacker doesn't know that they were, how they were caught, and in many cases doesn't even know that they were caught.
Have you ever been blocked by your system when you're using one of the merchants that's integrated with your system?
No, because I'm usually not perpetrating any kind of abuse or anything. So I'm like a pretty vanilla, boring customer, trying to buy Nikes or whatever, often unsuccessful.
But it's a pretty rare case when someone from a C-level decide just like to test how the system work, and R&D team really sitting just like, okay, someone going to test functionality and start blocking, and you send this amazing message to R&D team, guys, something went wrong because I'm legit person and I was declined. Could you explain me? I'm quite surprised that you never declined, but maybe not in real life, but I believe on a test, not on production, you like test a lot the system and understand how
Yeah.
this approach works.
And I would say I think we've been there where like some executive, and I certainly have, where some executive went through a flow and was like, hey, what the heck happened? Right? Like something is happening in the customer journey. And that's part of the asymmetry, I would say, like in fraud prevention as it sits today is, a lot of things are API based, right? And, we're looking and probably you and your listeners are looking across dozens maybe of systems, trying to pull data together from disparate systems at different checkpoints, right? And trying to piece together what's actually happening. And then you have the attackers, and then a well-meaning executive that's just going to go through like what you just described, like just go through the consumer experience itself as the source of truth, right? And to say like, whoa, like, Ivan, what happened here? Like, why am I getting blocked? Why can't I buy tickets? Or why did my daughter not, be able to buy tickets, right? So that's where like sitting in that customer journey, we feel at Spec is really important. Why I'm so passionate about it is we live in that customer journey as well, right? So there's no gaps. There's no information that's missing. We're always basically working off of a copy of that consumer experience so that, fraud fighters and executives and growth teams like have access to that single source of truth and understand exactly what's happening. And that's like where we feel like Spec is an evolution in, kind of fraud prevention and where, things have been, which has been largely API based or a JavaScript you drop down to kind of change the experience of prompt to CAPTCHA. But we felt like there was all of this data that was missing. And I think you hit in on that, where folk will go through and just be like, what's going on? Like, hey, like this is a terrible customer experience. Or the attackers will be like, oh, like, I think they're blocking my IP. Maybe I should cycle IPs. Or if I, have an account that I age, I can get around all of these checks, right? So they get that feedback from the customer experience as well. And that's why we deploy in that customer experience too.
Kind of, it's usually someone asks these questions on the interview, but I believe it's exactly great time for these questions. Do you believe it's better to decline real customers and decline fraud, or allow real customers and allow fraud? Generally speaking, do you believe what's better, precision or recall?
Oh, I mean, I will say, outside of my belief, which like I think aligns to business growth, it's always to allow good customers, right? And I think this is, some of the challenge for fraud fighters, right? So it's like, we're not just measured on what you stop, right? Like fraud, fraud losses, or measured on what that like consumer experience is, right? And there's that balance. The balance, I think, often skews the other way, right? Where ideally you would want basis points or even zero good customers blocked, and you're blocking almost all fraud. Being, kind of like a leader in a company, like revenue is the biggest driver, right, for the company. And blocking revenue is always a challenge, which leaves fraud fighters in, I think, a very, very difficult spot with not just the tools that they have, but with, again, that adversarial nature of like, attackers always changing and trying to get through, right? So I don't have a great answer for you, except to say that in my experience, it skews towards letting good customers through.
It's a great answer. I know, it's not conversation for 5 seconds or 5 minutes. It's the same as how developers say what's the better, like tab or space. They say someone using tab, someone using four times space. It's the same in the fraud prevention. I know a lot of people who say, oh, recall is important and precision as well. But we're usually balancing. That's what you described, because we're balancing between solution, prevention, and revenue perspective. And this is most important part.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you been a victim of fraud?
Yeah, definitely. I think we all, like, as just humans, like, can see that fraud pressure has increased, right? It's like, I get so many calls and texts and emails now, so many more. I'm sure you do as well. I think the first fraud scam I fell for was like like right after I created my first email in high school. It was the Nigerian scam, right? So I remember debating with my friends and none of us having any clue, right? I'm sure like I've lost credit card info through, kind of redirects or fake accounts, like where I think like most folks, like they're so ubiquitous now, we get better at it. The last one I think I fell for that didn't like result in losses was just the good old, like, email or text from an executive that isn't really your executive thing, and it quickly turned to Apple, like, gift cards, and, you could really quickly understand what's up. But I mean, there's just new creative ways all the time.
Yeah, for sure. It's usually is a lot of the great stories, and it's usually something, you work with this on every day, and you realize you're just like, okay, I'm actually in the trap of this problem right now. Supposed to be predicted, but as you mentioned, we have a lot of distractions nowadays. It's thousands of messages, and it's one of the things why I start to hate my Apple Watch, because I getting a lot of messages on Apple Watch, and it's quite annoying.
Yeah. And one of the things, like, I tell my family and my friends who aren't as savvy about fraud is just to, slow things down, right? It's just like, why are they rushing you, right? It's like, if you look at the, text from your executive, it's like, I'm in a meeting, I need this right away, right? It's like, well, why, right? Like, what's going on? So one of the things that I tell, the less initiated is like, just slow things down and see what happens. Like, and usually those types of vectors are quick. They're pushing you to make a fast decision, to not think about things, right? To like catch you in a moment of weakness or distraction, right? With the family or with your work, right? And they're trying to catch you where you're not fully focused. So one of the things I recommend is just to slow things down. and, see what happens.
That's a great advice. Great advice for everyone. Yeah, it's no point to rush. If it's something urgent happens, it probably options to slow down for a couple minutes. It's if it already happens, yeah, what you can do. Yeah, let's back to your career progression. You grow across different companies, and I saw you were a lot of managerial positions. My first question is, what do you believe is necessary to jump from core senior position to become a manager?
I think it's growth, and there's different things, right? And it's one of those things where I've seen in my career, and I believe most often to be the case, is that like you start to kind of pick up those responsibilities and you start to demonstrate that you're doing the job before you get fully promoted, officially into that job. Going from like a lead IC, right? You have to demonstrate that you know a lot. You're very capable and you can execute. What's going on. So in the fraud prevention space, it's you're largely, you have that institutional knowledge of your unique, vectors in your unique business, and you're able to identify kind of the trends before they happen or catch them as they're happening. And then as you move to kind of the managerial position, it kind of shifts to becoming, not just being a resource to the more junior members of your team, but like, how can you make your team as effective as you, right? And how do you make your team perform, better? How do you empower them, right? And how do you hire? How do you lead them? How do you give them the room to grow in their unique their unique way, right? And I'm a big believer, and as I mentioned previously, that fraud. Folks are attracted to fraud because it's a puzzle. It's a problem to solve, right? And everybody's going to bring a slightly different lens, right, in how they're going to solve it. So it's like, how do you to make that team better? And then if you want to progress, past that, I think the third phase is, how do you communicate to others in the organization? Like, fraud, I think, is a very esoteric thing, even within an organization, right? So if you're talking to security, they may understand a little bit, but not exactly what you're talking about. If you're talking to IT, they have a different focus, and it may or may not be completely fraud focused based on how large your organization is and how their roles and responsibilities are, kind of like sliced and diced. And then if you're talking to executives, they're often focused on top line growth, and stopping fraud is very rarely kind of a top line initiative that is being tracked to that level. So how do you partner with those leaders, and how do you show that, as you brought up before, it's like, we're not stopping good customers, right? We're stopping, bad customers, or we're creating a better customer experience. Or how do we remove friction in such a way to allow customers to kind of blossom and grow on our platform while not being non-compliant or losing too much revenue to fraud.
Great advices. I really agree with all of them, specifically that on IC level, let's say summarize like that. If you're on IC level, you're mostly a hard skill worker, and as grow you on IC level, you need to progress with your soft skills. Once you switch to manager, you're supposed to be really good on soft skills, but still keep like hard skills as well. However, as you progress on the manager, you just like become more and more soft skill person rather than hard skill person.
Yeah, and I think fraud is like, it requires that soft skill, just because it's so hard to get people to understand and care about it, right? I think, one thing I love about the industry is just the passion and kind of the sense of justice that, folks in the industry have, like sometimes to, our own detriment, right? Just to be over focused on fraud, but it's just something that is wrong, that is happening on the platform, that we feel compelled to stop. But convincing folks within your own organization is sometimes just as challenging as trying to get the tools implemented, or get access to the data to be able to identify and stop these fraud and abuse vectors.
What is necessary to progress even further in the organization and jump from managerial position to become executive? Like, what the skills are necessary? Maybe you can recommend any books, or maybe any recommendation actually.
I think, I would say one is data, right? And it's easy for, I think, for fraud folks, because like, you and your listeners, myself, like, have been immersed in data, whether it's running SQL queries directly into the database, utilizing, tools like Tableau or, other things to really visualize and understand and explain the fraud, and the abuse. I think, that is a big component, I think, of any executive is to have access to the data to draw the necessary conclusions from that data. And then communication, right? I would say fraud is a bit of a sales role, right? You're trying to, kind of sell, kind of what you're trying to get, either budget for tools, budget for personnel, budget for, like getting yourself a raise or a promotion, or even sell like what you're trying to do to internal stakeholders, engineering teams. Like I think the term that I've heard the most is like beg, borrow, steal, or cajole like an engineer to help you implement something, right? That you need to get your job done. So any kind of like communications or kind of like sales books even are great to read and basically, kind of further your ability to communicate and find some sort of common ground with folks that maybe on a day-to-day basis, fraud is like the 100th thing that they care about.
I believe 100% sure actually that you're super busy and you have a lot of things on your plate and you need to balance between the work and the family. But how you actually just like relax out of the work? Do you have like some exercise things? What keep you motivating to work every day? Because I know if it's no work-life balance, you actually just like start to burn out one day and you don't know what to do with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I have, a family at home that I spend a lot of time with, or as much time as I can, which, helps recharge for sure. That's a very fulfilling, thing to raise a child with my wife. And so that's really cool. And for fun, like I like to work on old broken cars. So that's like a bit of a puzzle that's much more tangible, right? So if you think about like when I was, more in kind of the day-to-day fraud space, you don't necessarily see the tangible outcomes of your efforts. And working on things around the house or on cars gives me that ability to tickle that puzzle piece, but also see tangible outcomes. So an engine that doesn't work that becomes working, or a leaking pipe that is no longer leaking. That gives, that's a bit of, kind of my personality and how I get, the ability to recharge outside of the corporate world.
I really like it specifically how you draw the line between these two things, because as long as you progress in the fraud, you just like started in the first to really fighting with someone, just blocking transaction, have this like amazing feeling inside yourself to say, I stopped 1 million. I don't know. I stopped 100 USD right now. I'm so great. And when you grow, you're just far away from this feeling and you need some like puzzles, as you mentioned, like doing something that's actually show you immediate result. Like cars is a great example. And yeah, I don't know what's the best hobby in place, but thank you for sharing this one. Actually, I don't believe I have any other questions. However, if you want to share any last minute advices for everyone who listens to this podcast, or if you want to say something, please, it's a great time. That's one.
Yeah, I would say I've been well served in my career to just follow the natural curiosity that I think led me to, kind of fraud prevention. I would say my advice is to continue to, nurture that curiosity, right? I think the best things about fraud fighters that I work with is, we've had to be creative and self-sufficient to, solve problems, right? I think, one of the things that I've had to do in the past is like I had to relearn how to write JavaScript to go and solve a problem because I didn't get the support that I needed because the engineering team was overloaded with things on their development roadmap, right? So we never know what those requirements are going to be in the future, but keep on being curious and learning and investigating the tools that attackers are using. There's just some really cool stuff that's not cool for the fraud prevention teams, but like there's just like been leaps and bound improvements in these tools that attackers are using. And it's important to kind of like be curious about that as well and understand how they're attacking and exploiting your systems. And yeah, just, keep being curious, keep learning. And I think you'll be successful.
amazing advices, and amazing end for our podcast today. Thank you once again to join me today. It is a pleasure to have you on my podcast and in the episode. And it's great talk. And every time I learn something new, and today I learned a lot of things as well. Probably I need to start to write something else down. But when I do post production, I actually just leave a lot of notes to myself to make sure that I'm not distracting while I'm recording something.
Awesome. Well, Ivan, thank you for having me on. It's been fun.
And I ended my podcast with my favorite word, which is cut.